The metallic creaking of the gates pierced Terry's ears, a sound he had long yearned to hear. To him, it was an unmistakable acoustic signal, a sonic milestone that marked the dividing line between his dark past and the dawn of a renewed existence. With the fresh air infiltrating his lungs, each breath filled his heart with indescribable joy. The reality that his long-awaited freedom had finally arrived was beginning to deeply root itself in his consciousness. "Wow!" Terry exclaimed, his gaze sweeping across the expanse of the world beyond the gates. 10 long years locked in this concrete and iron cage. 10 years torn away from my life. Now, at 32 years old, I feel joyful, but at the same time, I am bewildered by the magnitude of the freedom that suddenly unfolds before me. A guard approached Terry, extending a worn cardboard box containing the personal belongings he had left behind a decade ago. The clothes that once fit him well now hung loosely on his body, too big for his slender figure. The robust young man who had entered there 10 years ago had transformed, worn down by the harsh prison routine. The reality of his freedom, so sudden and overwhelming, was still struggling to solidify in his mind. The guards looked at him with farewell expressions, the corners of their lips curling up in polite smiles. "Good luck," they said, and finally, the coin of freedom dropped into the well of his consciousness. Yes, he was free. Freedom was palpable, it was real, and it was his. For a distressing decade, Terry had been confined to a maximum security prison cell, a victim of the injustice that condemned him for a crime he never committed. The legal process had been a strange and inscrutable storm, chance and circumstances conspiring against him, wrongly painting him as the villain in the jury's mind. Consequently, he was sentenced to serve 22 years of incarceration, a severe punishment that seemed destined to consume the best years of his life. However, after 10 years of exemplary conduct and constant effort to maintain integrity amidst the chaos of the prison system, Terry gained a chance for freedom, but this journey was not easy. He faced struggles and obstacles, desperately trying to appeal the sentence and prove his innocence. Despite all his attempts, all his efforts seemed to be in vain. The seemingly irrevocable conviction stood tall like an impenetrable wall, immune to all attempts to bring it down. The gravity of the injustice, the relentless resistance of the sentence that had condemned him so many years ago, seemed unshakable. Terry, however, persisted. He endured every blow, held his head high, and fought, despite all the difficulties. And finally, after a decade of resistance and resilience, he managed to emerge, no longer a prisoner, but a free man. Absorbing the first moments of his newly acquired freedom, Terry stepped out of the prison gates that had held him captive for a decade. This was the area where relatives and friends usually awaited the release of inmates, a place that used to be a stage for emotional reunions, but Terry knew, with a pang of loneliness in his chest, that there would be no eager family or close friends waiting for his release. Most people in his life had abandoned him when he needed them the most. He was not deluded. He was prepared to face this new phase alone. Suddenly, his gaze caught a parked car in the distance, and the sound of his name interrupted the silence. His heart skipped a beat as he turned to identify the source of the call. Upon recognizing the person behind the wheel, a smile spread across his face, marked by years of imprisonment. His best friend, Andres, had come to pick him up on the day of his release. Joy radiated from Terry as he rushed to greet his friend. With tears in his eyes, he tightly grasped Andres' hand in an emotional greeting. "My friend, I can't express how grateful I am that you're here. Thank you for not abandoning me, brother," Terry said, his emotion reverberating in his voice. Andres, in turn, smiled warmly, relief and joy evident on his face. "Of course, my friend, I would never abandon you," he affirmed with conviction. "And now, feel free to vent everything you want during the journey. Let's get out of this place. I'm sure you can stand to look at it and more." With contained joy, Terry nodded in agreement, and the two friends got into the vehicle with Andres behind the wheel heading towards Terry residence. During the journey, a fluent dialogue was established between them. Andres filled Terry in on the news and changes that had occurred during his decade of absence. Together, they had grown up in a shelter, dreaming of starting a business and forging a better future. However, Fate cruelly intervened, separating them when Terry was imprisoned. Meanwhile, Andres carried forward the business they had started together, an agricultural supply dealership, and became successful. Carefully avoiding the sensitive topic of imprisonment, Andres chose to make Terry comfortable in his presence. However, after noticing that Terry seemed more relaxed, Andres decided to address a matter that had been troubling him. "Remember, brother, this might sound absurd," Andres began with a hesitant tone, "but I need to tell you. I think I saw Maya." His tone took on a serious note. "I was at a farm in the countryside, a few kilometers from here, and I stopped to have lunch at one of those roadside restaurants. The woman I saw, she changed her hairstyle, her hair color, but she looked a lot like Maya. And she seemed more alive than both of us combined." A heavy silence settled in the car as Terry absorbed Andres' words. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with determination and outrage. "Andres, I've told you before, Maya's death, something was wrong. I didn't kill her. The media was under pressure, but the whole situation seemed manipulated. I was framed for a murder that never happened, a crime for which no evidence was even found. No matter the cost, I will prove my innocence and uncover the truth." Andres nodded, an equally somber expression on his face. "I know, my friend, I always found this story very strange." He paused before adding, "Moreover, that woman who looked a lot like Maya wasn't alone. There was a man with her." Andres' words added a new level of complexity to the situation, deepening the mystery that now seemed to unfold before them as the wave of indignation threatened to engulf him. Terry tried to breathe deeply, seeking a shred of serenity. A two marriage to Maya had brought more suffering and loss than joy to his life. They had tried several times to conceive a child, but the couple discovered, to their dismay, that Terry was sterile. That revelation cast a dark shadow over their marriage, mainly due to Eleanor and George, his relentless in-laws. These two never could bear the idea of their daughter married to a man who had been raised in an orphanage, and the news of Terry's sterility only strengthened their criticisms. They were firmly intent on separating Terry from their daughter, even making their marital life a living hell. Despite the pressure, Terry and Maya remained united, ignoring the hostility of their in-laws and seeking alternative solutions to the infertility problem. The situation was slightly alleviated when the company that Terry and Andres started together, specializing in the sale of agricultural supplies, began to flourish. With the resulting profit, Terry even bought a beautiful countryside house for them. Unfortunately, after Terry's imprisonment, the house was acquired by a wealthy farmer. Things started going wrong when Maya mysteriously disappeared shortly after the house purchase. Alarming signs suggested that she might be dead, and to Terry's dismay, he became the prime suspect in her disappearance. The investigation proceeded at a disturbingly fast pace, leaving Terry confused and disoriented. The whole process was surreal, and Terry couldn't understand what was happening. Without the interference of Eleanor and George, who used their wealth to bribe the court, Terry would never have been convicted. Furthermore, his defense lawyer proved to be ineffective, leaving Terry powerless against the plot manipulated by his in-laws. He knew in his heart that he hadn't killed Maya, but he was handcuffed, unable to prove his innocence. Now, with the possibility of Maya still being alive, a new wave of emotions flooded Terry. He began to ponder the idea that Maya might have started a new life, perhaps even with a new family, while he had been forced to sacrifice a decade of his life in prison. Breaking the silence that had settled in the vehicle, Andres spoke, bringing Terry back to the real world. "Terry, look, I have a plan in mind to get some leads. Maybe find out if Maya is truly still alive," Andres said, before quickly adding, "But before that, I believe you need to rest a bit." Terry silently nodded, his eyes fixed on the landscape rushing by the window. They were approaching Andres' house, a sanctuary where Terry could finally breathe a sigh of relief and recharge his energy. Spending so much time behind bars had drained Terry, both physically and mentally, and before embarking on the journey to uncover the truth, he knew he needed some time to acclimate to the outside world. With that thought, he stepped out of the car and entered Andres' house. The sensation of lying on a soft bed was strangely uncomfortable, almost a luxury that Terry felt he didn't deserve. He sat on the couch and turned on the television, a background noise to fill the emptiness of the house. Even though surrounded by comfort and freedom, Terry felt his body resisting the idea of being out of prison. His heart still beat to the rhythm of the years he spent locked up, as if the weight of the bars was still pressing against his chest. Terry realized that his true battle was only just beginning. A week after Terry regained his freedom, the two friends gathered for an intense and strategically planned conversation. "Terry," Andres began, his tone firm and resolute, "I've been thinking about the situation. I think we should go back to the town where I was that time. Maybe the owner of that roadside restaurant can give us some information about that woman I saw. I acknowledge that our chances may be slim, but it's the only lead we have at the moment. If we really want to unravel this web of mysteries, I believe now is the time." Terry listened attentively, his expression reflecting the skepticism dancing in his mind. "Are we relying too much on luck, Andres?" he countered. "Just imagine, a place like that must receive countless people every day. Who can guarantee that woman would even frequent that place again?" Despite Terry's objections, Andres was unwavering. With compelling arguments and unwavering determination, he managed to persuade Terry that this was the only viable chance they had to make progress in their search for the truth. Agreeing to take this uncertain step, they both embarked on the journey heading to the small town and the modest restaurant that could hold the answers they longed for. They crossed the dirt road that led to the restaurant, their eyes absorbing the rustic scenery. A faded sign hanging at the entrance read, "Welcome to Jimmy's." As they entered the establishment, they were greeted by an elderly man with white hair and wrinkles that told stories of a lifetime. It was Jimmy, the owner of the restaurant. They talked about various things, from the road to the food served at the establishment, until Andres skillfully steered the conversation to what really mattered. "You know, Jimmy," Andres began, "it's not very common to see couples in this trucker's bar. Most of your customers are solo travelers. But the last time I was here, a particularly beautiful couple caught my attention." Jimmy, wiping a cloth on a glass, gave a pensive look before responding. "Yeah, it's rare indeed, but I remember the day you're talking about. You're referring to Mark and Penelope Crawford." Andres, with a touch of subtlety, continued. "Penelope, huh? They seem like a lovely pair. How long have they been married?" Jimmy shrugged, his eyes turning to the past. "Well, they've been married for about 9 years. Seemed to come out of nowhere, she did. Mark has always lived around here, inherited the land from his father, one of the biggest farmers in the region. Penelope, on the other hand, has always been reserved and mysterious, but they seem to love each other a lot. They even have 2 little ones running around," he said, giving a shy smile. With his eyes fixed on Jimmy, Terry listened attentively to every detail, every word. He felt his heart race faster with the possibility of finally being close to a truth hidden for so long. As Andres prepared to ask the final question, Terry could barely breathe. Jimmy Andres began sliding a bill to the man as a tacit thank you for his help. "As I mentioned before, my company specializes in the sale of agricultural supplies, and I believe Mr. Crawford could be a big client for us. Would you mind sharing his farm's address?" Jimmy's face lit up with a cunning smile. With a nod, he scribbled the address on a napkin, pushing it in Andres' direction. Andres took it, quickly glancing at it before passing it to Terry. On the paper was the answer to all the questions that plague him, the address that would lead him to an enigmatic past. Now, the decision was in his hands. He could face the truth, whatever it may be, or live eternally with the ghost of uncertainty. Terry swallowed hard, staring at the piece of paper as if it were a treasure map. Then, taking a deep breath, he made up his mind. He would go to the farm written on that dirty napkin. He was determined to uncover the whole truth. And what about you in Terry's place? Would you have the courage to pursue the truth? Share your opinion in the comments. Each step Terry took toward the farm seemed to bring him closer to a world of luxury and grandeur. The property exuded an aura of opulence, with lush fields and a majestic house in sight. His heart pounded heavily in his chest as he approached the porch, anxious and fearful of what he was about to discover. The sound of the door creaking made Terry hold his breath. And there she was. Maya, with a different appearance, her hair now styled elegantly and a distinct color from what he remembered. However, behind the changes, he recognized the familiar and unmistakable features of his ex-wife. She was alive, defying all odds, standing right in front of him. The moment their eyes met, the color drained from Maya's face. She raised her hand in a frantic gesture, silently begging him to leave. But Terry didn't retreat, his determination stronger than ever. Her. So now you're the one asking me to leave, Maya. I won't leave until you tell me the whole truth, Terry declared, his voice as firm as his resolute gaze. Maya seemed to hesitate for a moment before releasing a resigned sigh. Fine, Terry, but please, she pleaded in a hurried whisper. Speak softly, my husband might hear. Her expression was a mix of fear and supplication, a portrait of the complex situation she found herself in. Terry's gaze hardened as he absorbed what Maya had just hinted at. So he doesn't know, he questioned, his tone filled with bitterness. To him, you really go by the name Penelope. What kind of story did you tell him, Maya? Do you have any idea where I've been for the past 10 years? Do you know what it's like to rot behind bars while you live here in luxury? I won't speak softly. The least you deserve is to be exposed, Terry said, fury pulsating in every word he uttered. Maya, on the other hand, swallowed hard and began to explain. She told how everything was part of an elaborate scheme by George and Eleanor, her parents. Once a prosperous family, they had fallen into financial ruin and never accepted Maya marrying Terry, a man of humble origins, and as later discovered, incapable of producing an heir. However, everything changed when they met Mark, a man of significant wealth and influence in the region. They saw in Mark the opportunity to regain their lost fortune. With Maya married to him, her parents could rise again, living off their son-in-law's wealth. However, there was a significant obstacle, Terry. And that's how Maya and her parents devised a horrific plan. They staged Maya's death, allowing her to assume a new identity and marry Mark. By dying, Maya escaped a divorce that could threaten the inheritance her parents coveted, paving the way for the luxurious life they now led. And Terry, the man who truly loved Maya, became the innocent victim of this cruel game. The intricate plan woven by Eleanor and George made use of a complex network of connections and illicit bribes, ensuring that Terry was unjustly incarcerated for a decade. During that time, Maya, now known as Penelope, established a comfortable life with Mark. They had 2 children, an opulent home, while Terry suffered under a cruel and unjust sentence, confined within the cold walls of a prison cell. The anger that brewed within Terry was almost tangible as he shouted, "I can't believe you would do this, Maya. You stole 10 years of my life. What did I ever do to deserve this? I lost all my youth because of you." His scream echoed through the property, a violent accusation for anyone willing to listen. Maya desperately tried to deflect the topic, but there was nothing that could stop Terry's stormy fury. He cried out in anger. With each tear shed, the harsh reality of his unjust imprisonment became clearer in his mind. He was there, confronting the woman he once loved, and whose actions had led him to the torment he experienced for a decade. Without another word to his ex-wife, Terry walked away, but not before leaving a promise hanging in the air, the promise that justice would be served for everything she had done to him. Mark, my current husband, upon hearing the tumultuous dialogue, vehemently questioned his wife about the truth behind the accusations. Upon discovering the sordid reality, he not only kicked Maya out of their home but also reported her to the authorities for identity fraud. It is worth noting that everyone involved in a nefarious scheme that led to Terry's conviction was brought to trial. Maya, Eleanor, George, and the other accomplices were sentenced to prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay significant compensation to Terry for moral damages, for the unjust torment inflicted upon him. However, such a verdict was only a small consolation. Now, Maya, Eleanor, and George would experience the same cruelty they had inflicted upon Terry. Mark, also a victim of Maya and her family's schemes, ended up forging a friendship with Terry. He was in shock, Having been deceived in such a vile manner and found himself united with Terry on this journey for justice, having finally achieved justice, Terry could begin the life he had dreamed of during the arduous years behind bars. He was now free to sever ties with an unjust past and embark on a new existence. Terry overcame his ex-wife, now imprisoned alongside her parents and other criminals of the same ilk. A new chapter in Terry's life, a hopeful restart full of promises, had finally begun. Despite everything, Terry couldn't find joy in this revenge. All he wanted was for his life not to have been stolen by people he loved and trusted. Gradually, with the help of Andres, who stood by his side throughout the process, Terry managed to rebuild his life. The money he received served to restart his agricultural supplies business, which gradually began to thrive again. He found comfort in his routine and in the embrace of work, focusing on building a better future. Over the years, Terry made peace with his past. The freedom he once dreamed of became a reality. Although the wound of betrayal still hurt, he chose to move forward and focus on what could still be done. Finally, Terry found peace. His story is a reminder that justice may be delayed, but it always arrives. And that even in the face of the most difficult trials, there is always the possibility of starting over and finding joy again. In the end, Terry realized that his freedom meant much more than simply getting out of prison. It was about finding the strength to overcome the past, forgiving himself and others, and having the courage to begin anew. And that was a story of success. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time. Thank you.